one of humankind's most sacred stories, the story of Jesus Christ. Over 2 billion Christians revere it as gospel truth. But what if we don't know the whole story? What if more information about Christ's life was buried for centuries? A series of bizarre manuscripts have been unearthed, and they may paint a completely different picture of Jesus. A Jesus prone to desire, a Jesus capable of hate, a Jesus willing to kill.
Why would Christians want to portray Jesus as violent, as somebody who killed people?
Who wrote these shocking stories? And do they tell us anything about the life of Jesus?
Where did Jesus ever teach this? And where's this coming from?
It's time to explore the meaning behind these remarkable documents, to discover what can be learned from these ancient texts, and to find out if the biblical description of Jesus is incomplete. Christianity, the largest organized religion on earth. 1 in 3 human beings is a member. Its churches stretch across every continent, even Antarctica, and its legacy dates back 2,000 years. The story is told through the 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Texts seen by Christians as the earliest and most accurate representation of the life of Jesus. But what if there's more? What if something was left out? Something considered so scandalous it was denounced as blasphemous by the early church. Several of these lost Gospels have actually been found, and they paint an unexpected portrait of Christ. The writers of these ancient manuscripts were unknown scribes working in the 3 centuries after Jesus' death, possibly looking to promote their own versions of Christianity. Their Gospels were deemed heretical, but someone thought they were worth saving. In southern Egypt, someone, possibly local monks, wrapped the texts in leather, sealed them inside an earthenware jar, and buried them deep in the desert. Perhaps they were thinking someday, somehow, the writings would see the light of day. And more than 1,600 years later, they finally did. In 1945, a farmer searching for fertilizer makes a startling discovery. The earthen jar housing the alternative stories of Christ. The books are written in the Coptic language, most likely copies of translations from ancient Greek. Radiocarbon dating places these documents between the 3rd and 4th centuries. Their authenticity is not disputed. It's what's written in these documents that creates unprecedented controversy. They are called the Nag Hammadi Library, and may be one of the most important archaeological finds in history. In Cairo, religious scholars and archaeologists painstakingly decipher the texts, a process that continues to this day. The more they learn from the documents, the more amazing they become. The Nag Hammadi Library, combined with stories from other ancient texts, describes a belief system starkly different from Orthodox Christianity. Unheard of Christ stories, stories of a wild youth and teen years, even narratives portraying a possible relationship with a woman. These manuscripts offer a startling new look at the life of Jesus, challenging long-held basic precepts of the church.
They are less concerned to tell us about the historical Jesus. They are much more concerned to tell us what they think Jesus was all about, the significance of Jesus. And so Jesus is more of a philosopher, more of a revealer of knowledge, not the rabbi and prophet and savior known by his own contemporaries.
The texts from Nag Hammadi are just some of dozens of extraordinary, non-canonical stories filled with remarkable claims. Starting with the birth of Christ. One manuscript is called the Infancy Gospel of James, a collection of stories handed down over the centuries. It rewrites the birth story to re-emphasize Jesus' poverty, Mary's chastity, and the wonder of the Son of God being born. For example, Jesus wasn't born in a stable, but a cave. And his father, Joseph, was actually a frail old man with several children from another wife. Joseph's greatly advanced age ensures that Mary remains sexually pure.
The fact of retelling the story in this way, with Joseph as an old man who was previously married and had children, allows Mary to be pure and Joseph to be removed even further from Mary. Joseph can stay in the story, but he keeps himself out of the bed of Mary.
In this account, before they reach Bethlehem, Mary goes into labor, and she's going to give birth there in this cave. Well, Joseph doesn't want to do the delivery himself, so he runs off to try and find a midwife. And as he goes out, he suddenly sees a miracle.
In the Infancy Gospel, Joseph says,
I saw the clouds astonished, and the fowls of the air stopping in the midst of their flight. And I looked down towards the earth and saw a table spread, and working people sitting around it. And their hands were upon the table, but they did not move to eat. All their faces were fixed upwards.
Joseph ends up finding a midwife and brings her back with him to the cave, but it's too late. The child's been born, and they see an infant who walks over to his mother.
The Infancy Gospel claims a newborn Jesus walks to Mary and begins suckling. It's a story that amuses many scholars. But others say this Infancy Gospel helps fill in the blanks of Christ's first day. Either way, one message of the Gospel is clear. Trying to understand the powers of Christ, even as an infant, may defy comprehension. Many scholars are intrigued by these texts. Some view these stories as literary missing links that attempt to portray a more mystical Jesus Christ, while others regard them as tales that say more about their authors than about the historical Jesus. But questions continue to haunt biblical scholars. Why were these stories written, and by whom? At the dawn of the 21st century, many experts believe they reflect the chaotic environment in which early Christianity was born. In the 2nd and 3rd centuries, probably every Christian had an opinion about Jesus of Nazareth. These alternative stories, whether fact or fiction, may have been ways for people to come to terms with Jesus Christ, the man, the prophet, the Son of God. Opinions ranged from the traditional to the extreme.
Some groups claimed that there were 36 gods. Some groups claimed that there were 365 gods. And all these groups called themselves Christian and maintained that their views were the legitimate views.
There are stories of Jesus being very close with a woman, Jesus avoiding crucifixion, Jesus walking resurrected as a giant. One gospel, unearthed in Egypt in 1896, claims that Jesus' closest disciple was a woman. The text, which its authors attributed to Mary Magdalene, hints at a more intimate relationship with Jesus. Another of the lost texts is the Gospel according to Judas, the betrayer of Christ. In this stunning document, Judas is portrayed as a hero for handing over Christ to the authorities. This gospel says Jesus told Judas to do it, and that Judas would be favored for doing the deed.
Some people will simply reject these texts, say that they are heresy, wish that we'd put them back in the hole out of which we found them, see in fact that they are just another manifestation of the devil, yet again out to lead people astray.
The investigation into who wrote these radical texts leads to the heart of the political and religious confusion following Jesus' death. The ancient Middle East roiled with religious and philosophical currents: Judaism, Stoicism, Egyptian and Syrian faiths. One of these movements was a group of revolutionary sects called Gnostics. Many Gnostics considered themselves Christian.
word for knowledge in Greek is gnosis, and so these people called themselves, or were called, Gnostic.
For these Christians, Jesus was a divine savior brought to them from beyond the bounds of the physical universe. His body was simply an earthly disguise housing a divine spirit.
Part of the struggle in the early church was deciding, who is Jesus anyway? To what extent was he a son of man or a human being? To what extent was he a divine being and the Son of God?
Many Gnostics were drawn to the figure of Jesus.